What is up, Tube users? I am the Stereotypical Gamer, and welcome back to another installment of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today, we are taking a look at my least played tank hero, but after messing around with him for a while now, I gotta say, he's probably one of my favorite heroes to play, and that is Doomfist. Let's jump right into things and talk about his passive ability. Doomfist's passive ability is the best defense. This passive ability grants Doomfist temporary overhealth when dealing damage to enemies with his abilities. This does not apply to his primary fire, but it does apply to his secondary fire ability, his first ability, and his ultimate, all of which we'll get into later. For heroes he deals damage to with his normal abilities, he gains 35 overhealth per enemy hit. For his ultimate, he gains 75 overhealth per enemy hit. After 1 second, the overhealth starts decaying at a rate of 3 HP per second. Dealing more damage with abilities resets this cooldown, however. Now, let's move on to Doomfist's primary fire. Doom's primary fire is Hand Cannon. This is a shotgun-like projectile that deals 5 to 1.5 damage per pellet depending on the range. With a total of 11 pellets per shot, the maximum damage Doom can do with one shot is 55. This definitely is meant to be used in more close-range combat, as the fall-off range starts at 15 meters and reaches its minimum damage at 30 meters. An interesting thing about this primary fire is it automatically reloads after 3/4 of a second of not firing. Using a melee attack also does not interfere with the reloading. Now, let's go over Doomfist's secondary fire ability. Doom's secondary fire ability is Rocket Punch. This is a charged ability that charges Doom forward 6.3 to 19.7 meters in front of him depending on the charge. If Doom impacts an enemy, they take 25 to 50 damage, also depending on the charge, and are knocked back. Additionally, if enemies slam into a wall of some kind from the knockback, they take an additional 10 to 30 damage depending on the charge. This ability is able to hit multiple targets thanks to Blast Back, which applies the effect to enemies in a small radius behind the target. The hitbox for Doom's punch is roughly the size of Doomfist himself, making it easier to try and connect with an enemy. This ability can also be empowered with Doomfist's second ability, Power Block, but we'll get into how that happens in a little bit. Basically, an empowered Rocket Punch increases the damage, range, and knockback by 50%. Another interesting thing to note is this ability can be cancelled by pressing another ability button or primary fire. Cancelling this ability will cause it to go on cooldown, but if cancelled with an empowered punch, Doomfist will keep his empowered punch for the next time he uses the ability. Finally, this ability can be used to countercharge other charge effects, like Briggs' Shield Bash, Reinhardt's Charge, or an opposing Doomfist Rocket Punch. If done, both Doom and the opposing enemy will be knocked down and stunned for 2 seconds. Now, let's move on to Doom's first ability. Doomfist's first ability is Seismic Slam. This ability works similarly to Winston's Jump Pack, where Doom launches himself into the air and slams back down, causing damage in an area around him. The area is a 90-degree cone in front of Doom that goes 18 meters in front of him. Any enemies in that cone take 50 damage and contribute to overhealth for Doomfist. This is another ability that can be cancelled by activating another ability. One thing to note about this ability is the AoE effect does have some verticality to it of 1.45 meters. While it's not a whole lot of verticality, if a target is affected that is airborne, it will temporarily stun the target. Now, let's move on to Doomfist's next ability. Doomfist's second ability is Power Block. This ability reduces incoming damage to Doomfist by 80% for a maximum of 2.5 seconds. During this ability, Doomfist's movement is decreased by 35%. If Doom mitigates at least 125 damage or more, he'll gain his empowered punch. Doomfist will only mitigate damage that is taken in front of him. So any damage he takes from his sides or behind him during this ability will not be mitigated and will not contribute to his empowered punch. This doesn't apply to Hanzo's Dragon Strike or Torbjorn's Molten Core, however, as both those abilities will be mitigated no matter which way Doom is facing. Doom will also mitigate stuck projectiles even if he uses this ability after he's stuck. Now, let's finally go over Doomfist's ultimate ability. Doomfist's ultimate ability is Meteor Strike. This ability launches Doom up into the air and out of the field of play, where he can't be targeted by any abilities or fire whatsoever. While in the air, the targeting for the landing works similarly to Bastion's ultimate ability, where Doom can see his targeted location and zoom out if he needs to. Once activated, there's a 2-second grace period before landing where enemies can get out of range. There are 2 different damaging radiuses for this ability. The inner radius is 2 meters and the outer radius is 8 meters. Enemies caught within the inner circle take 300 damage, and enemies in the outer circle take 100 to 15 damage depending on how far out they are. Enemies caught within either circle contribute to 75 overhealth per target for Doomfist. The targeting time lasts for up to 4 seconds, during which Doom will regain 75 HP per second. After landing, Doomfist will also gain an empowered punch, and all of his cooldowns and abilities will be reset. Now that we've gone over all of his abilities, let's dive into heroes that counter and are countered by Doomfist. Doomfist is an exceptional dive tank. He is extremely good at going after enemy backlines thanks to all of his movement abilities. Because of this, he doesn't really ever want to fight a tank head on, but instead go for the tank's backline first. But as for a tank that Doomfist usually plays well against, I'm going to go with a Reinhardt. Ryan usually wants to play in the front lines, shielding his team from there and denying enemy space with his melee attacks. Doom can easily jump over Reinhardt and start causing havoc in Ryan's backline, which can cause Ryan to have to peel for his team, something that he's not great at doing quickly. Plus, Doomfist's Rocket Punch can counter Ryan's charge, and while Ryan does have the HP advantage when stunned on the ground, this can be a good way to save a teammate that is stuck in a Reinhardt's charge. As for a DPS hero Doom plays well against, I'm going to go with Soldier 76. While I wouldn't say this is a hard counter by any means, as Doomfist works well at disrupting a lot of enemy DPS, what he does more effectively against Soldier is putting him out of position. Since Soldier's healing station is an area of effectability once placed, Doom can easily knock Soldier out of that area, leaving him pretty vulnerable. Finally, a support hero Doom plays well against is Lifeweaver. Lifeweaver's survivability mainly comes from his verticality thanks to his pedal platform. Doom can easily deny that area thanks to his seismic slam. Plus, Doom is able to knock enemies out of the effective range of Lifeweaver's Tree of Life, causing them to not gain heals and be more vulnerable. Now, let's look at the other side of things and see which heroes counter Doomfist. Doomfist is excellent at disrupting enemy backlines, but can be vulnerable when his abilities are on cooldown, which usually happens when they are interrupted or he's stunned. A tank hero that can do this is Orisa. Orisa is able to use her spear to interrupt Doom's power block, denying him the chance to gain an empowered punch. Plus, when fortified, Orisa cannot be knocked back by Doomfist's Rocket Punch. A DPS hero that plays well against Doom is Cassidy. With the rework to Cassidy's Magnetic Grenade causing a hinder effect that temporarily disables movement abilities, this really hurts an enemy Doomfist. The majority of Doomfist's engagement into fights and retreats away from fights come from his movement abilities. Denying that, even for a short time, can be extremely detrimental to Doomfist. Finally, a support hero that plays well against Doomfist is Brigitte. Brigitte's main priority is protecting her backline, something Doomfist is constantly trying to disrupt. With her abilities, she can easily engage into or fend off an enemy Doomfist that is in her backline. Now that we've gone over all the counters, let's dive into some tips and tricks for Doomfist. Now, I'm definitely not an expert at Doomfist tech because there is a lot of things that you can do with Doomfist, and it's pretty difficult to pull off. I would say him and Wrecking Ball are two of the hardest tanks just because of how much movement they're able to do with their movement abilities. One of the easier movement techs that I like to do coming out of spawn is to use your rocket punch, and then while you still have the momentum from rocket punch, you use your seismic slam to go up into the air, which carries the momentum from your rocket punch and makes you go even further than you normally would. This is a really good tool, and especially if you get good at it, just picking Doomfist to get back to point quickly, especially for like an overtime situation, can be really useful for your team. Another thing I like to do is to try and poke out enemy abilities, and I do this by slamming into enemies, which usually Seismic Slam is going to gain you more overhealth because of how large the area of effect is. So I will slam into enemies and then punch out, just so I can gain that overhealth, and then once my slam is back on cooldown, I'll re-engage into enemy backlines. Another thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you use all your cooldowns. You don't have to all the time, but it's a good tool to do, is using all your cooldowns when you're about to ult, because it resets all those cooldowns. It could be a good way to get 2 cycles of all your cooldowns used on enemies. Another effective tool is using the ability to cancel any of your abilities to bait out enemy cooldowns. So like with your rocket punch, since you're able to see when Doomfist is charging that up, usually enemies will try and counter that with like a brick shield bash or just some different cooldowns, and being able to cancel that to bait out those cooldowns can be a really effective tool. And especially with Rocket Punch, since you have that decreased movement speed, a lot of times enemies will try and use some sort of stun, like on a sleep dart or just different abilities, and just being able to recognize that usually that's what will happen, and being able to react to that is a really useful tool when playing Doomfist. Another thing I like to do when playing against an enemy tank that's playing in the front lines is to seismic slam into the back lines and then rocket punch them from behind closer into my team. And that way that just kind of gets them out of position from their supports and gives my team a better chance at taking them out. And although all of Doomfist abilities have a pretty short cooldown, you never want to be caught in enemy backlines without any of your cooldowns. Typically I want to have at least one of my movement abilities off cooldown just to make sure I can get out of there safely. But if I have my Meteor Strike or I'm about to have my Meteor Strike, I will typically play more aggressive because I know that all my cooldowns will reset and I'll be safe for a little bit of time while the Meteor Strike is active. But anyways, that's all the tips and tricks I have for you today. I know there's probably a lot more tips for Doomfist, but again, I'm not a super well-versed Doomfist player, so make sure to leave a comment for any other tips and tricks you have for Doomfist, because he's one of my favorite heroes right now to play, and I just want to get better with him the more I play him, really. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.